Most people know what love bombing looks like in its obvious form. The overwhelming, relentless, slightly too much too soon quality of someone who is flooding you with attention and affection at a pace that does not match the actual depth of what has been built between you. The constant contact, the declarations that arrive before the relationship has earned them, the grand gestures that feel, underneath the pleasure of receiving them, slightly performative, slightly organized around an agenda rather than emerging naturally from genuine feeling. The normal love bombing has a quality that many people, in retrospect, can identify as excessive, as pressure wearing the costume of romance, as something that did not quite feel right even when it felt good. Avoidant love bombing is nothing like that, and that is exactly why it is so much more devastating. Avoidant love bombing does not feel like too much. It feels like exactly enough. It does not arrive with the breathless, slightly desperate quality of someone who needs you to be dazzled. It arrives with the specific, quiet, unhurried quality of someone who is genuinely present and genuinely interested and genuinely moved by you in ways they are not rushing to perform. It feels innocent because it is innocent. It feels real because it is real. It feels like the beginning of something extraordinary because in that moment for the avoidant, it actually is. That is what makes it brutal, not the intention, the authenticity. To understand why avoidant love bombing is different from every other version of this experience, you need to understand something specific about how dismissive avoidant attachment works in the early stages of a connection that the avoidant has not yet recognized as a threat. The avoidant's defensive architecture, the walls, the managed distance, the careful calibration of emotional exposure, does not activate in response to attraction. It activates in response to attachment, to the specific, felt experience of genuine need for another person, to the moment the connection deepens past the level of enjoyable and into the territory of significant, of mattering, of the other person's presence becoming something the avoidant's interior is beginning to quietly organize around. In the early stage, before that threshold is crossed, something remarkable happens. The avoidant is free. The fear is not yet activated because the attachment has not yet reached the level that activates the fear. The defensive architecture is offline because the thing it was built to defend against has not yet arrived. And in that window, that specific, beautiful, genuinely extraordinary window before the fear catches up to the feeling, the avoidant is more fully, more completely, more authentically present than almost anyone you have ever encountered. Because here is what you need to understand about avoidance. They are not emotionally shallow. They are emotionally deep in ways that the defended exterior consistently misrepresents. The interior life of a dismissive avoidant is often rich and perceptive, and genuinely capable of the kind of attunement and sensitivity that most people spend their lives looking for in a partner. All of that genuine depth, all of that real capacity for connection, was being held behind the walls, was being managed at a comfortable distance from full expression. And in the early stage of a connection that has not yet triggered the fear, it pours out, naturally, unself-consciously, with the specific, overwhelming quality of something that has been dammed for a long time, suddenly finding an open channel. That is what you received. The full, undefended, genuinely extraordinary version of a person who is capable of extraordinary presence when the fear is not yet running. And it was real. Every moment of it was real. That is not a small thing to understand. The person who made you feel that way was not performing, was not executing a strategy, was not manufacturing intensity to hook you before showing you who they really are. They were being who they actually are when the architecture is not running, and who they actually are in those conditions is extraordinary. The specific texture of avoidant love bombing is worth describing in detail, because the details are what make it so different from the kind you have been warned about. And the details are what make the loss of it so specific and so hard to grieve cleanly. It arrives in small moments rather than grand gestures. That is the first thing that distinguishes it. Normal love bombing is organized around impact, around the gesture that cannot be ignored, the statement that overwhelms, the action that announces itself as significant. Avoidant love bombing does not announce itself. It accumulates. It is the specific way they tilted their head when you said something that surprised them. The message sent at an unremarkable hour for no particular reason except that something reminded them of something you said. The question that demonstrated they had been listening not just to your words, but to the texture of your thinking, the moment of genuine laughter that had the quality of something shared rather than performed. These things do not feel like a campaign. They feel like the natural expression of a person who is genuinely paying attention, who is genuinely moved by you, who is responding to who you actually are rather than to the idea of you. And that naturalness, that absence of campaign, is what makes it so disarming. You cannot protect yourself from something that does not feel like something to protect yourself from. The second thing that distinguishes it is the quality of the seeing. Avoidance, particularly in the early stage before the defensive architecture reactivates, see with a specificity and an accuracy that is genuinely rare. The same perceptual sensitivity that makes them attuned to threat in relational contexts makes them extraordinarily attuned to the specific, individual, unrepeatable quality of another person when that attunement is not being managed against the threat. They see the real you, not the curated version, not the version you present in most social contexts, the specific, genuine, sometimes hidden version that you have been waiting for someone to see without prompting. Being seen like this is one of the most powerful human experiences available. It produces the specific, deep, difficult to replicate feeling of being genuinely known, of being in the presence of someone who does not require you to explain yourself because they are already ahead of the explanation. This kind of seeing is not common. For many people, it is the first time they have experienced it in a relationship. And it creates a bond that is not proportional to the time elapsed or the experiences shared, because the bond is formed not through accumulation, but through depth, through the specific, immediate, genuinely extraordinary experience of being fully seen. The third thing that distinguishes avoidant love bombing is the vulnerability. This is the most important distinction, and the one that makes the whole experience so particularly difficult to understand and recover from. Normal love bombing does not involve genuine vulnerability from the person doing it. It involves the performance of vulnerability, the sharing of just enough personal history to create the feeling of intimacy without the actual exposure of genuine, undefended interior life. It is calibrated, strategic, designed to produce a specific effect rather than emerging from genuine openness. The vulnerability in avoidant love bombing is real. In the early stage, before the fear catches up to the feeling, the avoidant shares things they genuinely do not share widely, opens in ways that are not their ordinary mode, shows you the interior that the defensive architecture spends the rest of their relational life protecting from being seen. And because the opening is genuine, because it is not calibrated or strategic but is the actual, natural expression of someone who is temporarily free from the fear that ordinarily prevents it, it lands with the full, devastating weight of genuine intimacy. You receive someone's genuine interior, their actual wounds and their actual joys and their actual perspective on the world in its full, specific, unmanaged form. You were trusted with the real thing. That is not an illusion. That trust was real. That interior was real. The specific, extraordinary person you encountered in those early moments exists, was present, was genuinely with you in the way that genuine presence feels. The tragedy of avoidant love bombing is not that it was false. It is that it was true, and then the fear arrived. Because the fear always arrives, that is the structural reality of dismissive avoidant attachment that transforms the extraordinary early experience into the specific brutal dynamic that the people who have lived it describe with a consistency that is almost uniform. The vocabulary is different, but the shape of the story is always the same. Something shifted. The warmth became metered. The presence became managed. The person who was so fully there began to be only partially there, and the partial there quality was so specific a contrast to the fully there quality that had preceded it that the partial became more painful than total absence would have been. The fear arrives when the connection crosses the threshold, when the attachment deepens from enjoyable to significant, when the genuine feeling becomes large enough that its presence in the avoidance interior begins to activate the very thing the defensive architecture was built to prevent from being activated. The specific, physiological, deeply conditioned fear response of someone who learned, in the most formative conditions available to a human being, that genuine need for another person is dangerous, that genuine attachment produces the specific outcome they are most organized to avoid. The fear does not arrive with self-awareness. The avoidant does not sit with the conscious understanding of, I am afraid of how much this matters to me, and therefore I am going to create distance. The fear arrives as its behavioral output, as the withdrawal that appears without adequate explanation, as the cooling that follows a moment of particular warmth, as the managed version of the person replacing the genuine version with a consistency that builds over time from occasional to characteristic. And you, who received the genuine version, find yourself in the specific, bewildering, often maddening position of relating to the managed version while carrying the memory and the felt sense of the genuine one. The managed version is not who you fell for. is not who sent those messages and asked those questions and saw you with that specific devastating accuracy, but it is who is here now. And the gap between the two, the specific daily experienced gap between the person who was so fully present and the person who is now so carefully not fully present, is where the brutality of avoidant love bombing actually lives. The brutality is not what happens during the love bombing phase. That phase was real and beautiful and genuinely extraordinary, and the brutality of what follows does not retroactively make it something other than what it was. The brutality is what the love bombing phase makes possible, by demonstrating, in the most specific and personal terms available, exactly what you are missing. Most relationship pain is organized around the absence of something you have not fully experienced. You know you want genuine connection and genuine seeing, and the specific quality of being with someone who is fully present. But the wanting is somewhat abstract, organized around a concept, rather than a specific embodied, experientially confirmed reference point. The avoidant love bombing phase gives you the reference point. It takes the abstract wanting and converts it into the specific, embodied, this is exactly what it feels like, and now I know experience of the real thing. And then the fear arrives, and the managed version replaces the genuine version, and the wanting is no longer abstract. It is the specific, daily, precisely targeted longing for the exact version of this exact person that you had, and that has become intermittent, and the intermittency is organized around the specific contrast to the fullness that preceded it. This is why avoidant love bombing is so much more brutal than the ordinary variety. Normal love bombing leaves you with the pain of discovering that the intensity was not real. Avoidant love bombing leaves you with the pain of knowing that the intensity was real and is now inaccessible. The distinction is enormous. The first pain grieves an illusion. The second pain grieves a genuine thing, and genuine things are considerably harder to grieve than illusions. The specific psychological impact of the avoidant love bombing and withdrawal cycle deserves its own honest examination, because it is not simply the ordinary pain of relationship difficulty. It is a specific, serious, identifiable form of psychological disruption. The intermittent reinforcement that the cycle produces, the full presence of the early period followed by the partial presence of the fear-activated period, with occasional returns to something approaching the original fullness when the connection settles to a level the avoidant can temporarily manage, creates the specific neurological conditions of the most effective addiction known to behavioral psychology. The reward system responds to unpredictable, intermittent access to something genuinely valuable, with a level of activation and seeking behavior that consistent access never produces. The brain orients toward the variable reward with a focus and a persistence that the consistent reward does not generate. The result is that the person who experienced the avoidant love bombing phase becomes, in the most literal neurological sense, oriented toward the recovery of that experience, with a consistency and a persistence that is not proportional to the rational assessment of the likelihood of recovery. The logical part of the mind can understand clearly that the managed version is now the characteristic presentation, and the full version is intermittent and decreasing. And the orienting toward the recovery of the full version continues anyway, driven not by logic, but by the specific, powerful, neurologically encoded memory of the reward, and the learned association between this specific person and the possibility of that reward's return. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system functioning as designed in response to conditions that exploit the specific vulnerability of the reward system to intermittent reinforcement. Understanding this does not immediately resolve the orienting, but it changes its meaning from personal failing to understandable neurological response to unusual conditions. There is something worth saying about the avoidant themselves in all of this, that the brutality forward framing of the experience tends to obscure, because the avoidant is not simply a person who delivers an extraordinary experience and then withdraws it. They are a person who is, in their own way, a prisoner of the same dynamic that is imprisoning you. The genuine version of themselves that appeared in the early phase, the undefended, fully present, extraordinarily attuned version that saw you so clearly and was so genuinely moved, that is who they actually are. That is not a mask worn over a more cynical or more indifferent reality. It is the real interior that the defensive architecture spends the rest of the time protecting from being accessed. And the avoidant lives with the specific, private, often unacknowledged knowledge that they are that person, and cannot consistently be that person because the fear arrives and the architecture reasserts and the genuine version gets managed back below the surface. The loss is on both sides. They lost the genuine version of themselves as a daily reality in the same moment you lost the genuine version of them as your consistent experience. The fear that protects them from the risk of genuine intimacy also separates them from the most genuine version of themselves. That is its own specific tragedy. Real and worth acknowledging, without the acknowledgement requiring the softening of the impact on you. The avoidant love bombing cycle is brutal because everyone in it is losing something real. You are losing the extraordinary experience of being seen and present with someone genuinely extraordinary. They are losing the specific, brief, genuinely free experience of being fully themselves in connection with another person. The fear takes from both, and the taking is not malicious. It is the damage of early wounds running their predictable program in the most consequential possible conditions. What do you do with all of this? With the knowledge that what you experienced was real and is now receded, that the person who showed you so fully was genuine and is now managed, that the brutality of the cycle is not the product of deception, but of fear, that the loss is enormous and the cause is comprehensible, and neither the comprehensibility nor the enormity reduces the reality of the other. You grieve the real thing as the real thing. That is the first and most important thing. The avoidant love bombing phase was not an illusion to be dismissed. It was genuine contact with a genuine person in their most genuine form. It deserves to be grieved with the full weight of genuine loss, rather than dismissed as something that turned out not to be real. It was real. It ended. Both things deserve honest acknowledgement, rather than the simplification of either the "it was never real" framing, or the "they will come back to that version" framing. You also hold clear what the cycle requires of you in order to sustain itself. The cycle of avoidant love bombing and withdrawal requires your availability to the partial version, requires your continued orientation toward the recovery of the full version as the organizing principle of your investment, requires the specific, costly, quietly serious allocation of your attention and your energy and your hoping toward the intermittent possibility of the full presence returning. The full presence may return, in moments, in the specific, unguarded, fear-briefly offline moments that the avoidant's genuine connection with you still produces occasionally. But the structural reality of dismissive avoidant attachment means that the full version is not the version available for daily, ordinary, building on it relationship life. The full version is the version available when the fear is not yet activated or is temporarily offline. The version available for the relationship itself, for the sustained, consistent, ordinary Tuesday presence that genuine relationship is built on, is the managed version. And the managed version, however genuinely it contains genuine feeling, is not what you were promised by the extraordinary beginning, is not what the specific, precise, embodied reference point of the love bombing phase established as the standard, is not the adequate nourishment for someone who knows from direct experience what the full version feels like. You deserve the full version as the daily reality rather than the intermittent exception. You deserve to be with someone for whom being genuinely present with you is not contingent on the fear being temporarily offline. Someone for whom the full version is available consistently rather than in the specific, extraordinary, ultimately insufficient bursts that the avoidance relationship with their own interior currently makes possible. The avoidant love bombing phase showed you something true about what you deserve, showed you in the most specific and experiential terms available, the quality of presence and seeing and genuine connection that you are capable of inspiring in another person, and that you are capable of receiving. That reference point is valuable. It is not a wound, it is evidence. Evidence of the specific, real, entirely achievable quality of connection that is possible between you and someone who can sustain it. The brutality is real, the loss is real, and underneath both of them, for anyone honest enough to look, is the specific, extraordinary, entirely genuine experience of having been fully met by another person for a window of time. The full meeting was real. The person who gave it was real in giving it. What comes next is the life that uses that reference point honestly rather than chasing its specific source indefinitely. You know what it feels like now. You have the reference point. You know what you are looking for, and you know it exists because you felt it. Go find someone who can give it to you every day, not just when the fear is offline. The full version as the daily reality. That is what this comes back to. And it is worth staying with that idea honestly rather than moving past it too quickly, because the specific experience of avoidant love bombing creates a particular confusion around this point that deserves direct examination. The confusion is this. The love bombing phase demonstrated that the full version is available in this specific person, that the capacity for extraordinary presence, genuine seeing, authentic vulnerability, these things exist in them, are real, were demonstrated with enough clarity and enough specificity that their existence cannot be honestly denied. And the knowledge that the capacity exists makes the question of why the capacity is not consistently available feel like a question with a solvable answer, like a problem with a solution, like something that patience or understanding or the right conditions or the right timing might eventually unlock into something that stays unlocked. This is the specific particular trap of avoidant love bombing that does not exist in its ordinary counterpart. The ordinary counterpart's intensity was not rooted in genuine capacity. When it fades, there is nothing to point to as evidence of what was temporarily present. The fading confirms the suspicion that the intensity was performed rather than genuine. The avoidant love bombing phase's fading points to something entirely different. It points to genuine capacity that is genuinely inaccessible most of the time. And the existence of the genuine capacity is exactly what makes the inaccessibility so painful and so specifically disorienting. You are not chasing something that was never there. You are chasing something that was demonstrably, specifically embodied in your direct experience there. And the chasing feels rational because the evidence for the thing being real is also the evidence for the chase being worthwhile. This is the trap. The evidence of the capacity is simultaneously the evidence of the loss and the fuel for the hope of recovery. The same experience that tells you what you lost also tells you that what you lost is real and therefore theoretically recoverable. The trap is elegant in its architecture, and getting out of it requires holding something that the trap makes very difficult to hold. The capacity is real, and the consistent availability of the capacity is not currently there, and the distinction between those two things matters more than almost anything else in the honest assessment of the situation. The specific experience of living inside the avoidant love bombing aftermath, the period after the initial phase has receded and the managed version has become the characteristic presentation, has a quality that most people find very difficult to describe to people who have not experienced it. And the difficulty of describing it is part of what makes the healing from it more complicated than the healing from other forms of relationship pain. It has the quality of haunting. The previous version of the connection does not simply become a memory. It becomes a presence. It lives in the specific daily ordinary moments of the current dynamic as the comparison point that the current dynamic is consistently failing to reach. Every interaction with the managed version is shadowed by the memory of the genuine version. Every partial presence is experienced against the backdrop of the full presence that preceded it. Every metered warmth is felt in contrast to the unmetered warmth that was the earlier standard. This haunting is not self-indulgent. It is the natural, predictable consequence of the neurological encoding that the love bombing phase produced. The nervous system encoded the earlier experience at a depth that means it remains an active reference point rather than simply a memory. It is not available to be filed away into the past the way ordinary positive memories are filed. It stays present, stays active, keeps being retrieved and applied to the current experience as the comparison that the current experience consistently fails. The result is that the person in the aftermath of avoidant love bombing is living in two temporal registers simultaneously. In the present of the managed, partial, fear-driven dynamic, and in the recent past of the full, genuine, fear-free extraordinary experience. Both are real. Both are present as felt experiences. And the gap between them is not a gap between what is real and what was imagined. It is the gap between two real things that were both available in the same person at different moments, which is, in terms of difficulty to navigate, considerably more demanding than the ordinary gap between expectation and reality. The recovery from avoidant love bombing requires something specific that generic relationship recovery advice does not adequately address. It requires the specific, deliberate, honest work of separating two things that the experience has thoroughly entangled. The first thing is the genuine quality of what was experienced, the real seeing, the authentic presence, the genuine vulnerability, the specific extraordinary quality of the connection in its full form. This is real and valuable, and worth honoring rather than dismissing, worth carrying forward as evidence of what is possible and what you deserve, rather than discarding in the service of moving on quickly. The second thing is the specific person through whom the experience was delivered, the avoidant whose fear-free early stage made the extraordinary experience possible. These two things, the quality of the experience and the specific person, have been entangled by the experience itself. The experience and the person feel inseparable because the experience was delivered by the person, and the person is associated with the experience at a neurological level. That makes the separation feel almost impossible. But the separation is not only possible, it is necessary. Because holding the quality of the experience as evidence of what you deserve and what is possible is healthy and forward-facing. Holding the specific person as the only available source of that quality is the trap. The trap that keeps the seeking behavior oriented toward the recovery of the specific experience in the specific person, rather than toward the genuine, available, building toward it possibility of the same quality of experience in someone whose fear does not prevent it from being the daily reality rather than the intermittent exception. The person showed you what is possible. They are not the only source of what is possible. That distinction, held clearly and held with enough force to override the neurological encoding that keeps pointing toward the specific source, is the work that avoidant lovebombing recovery specifically requires. There is something worth saying about what the avoidant is experiencing in the aftermath of the lovebombing phase, from their own interior perspective. Not to redirect sympathy, but because understanding their experience of the same period illuminates something important about the full picture. The avoidant who delivered the extraordinary early experience is also living in the aftermath of it. And their experience has a specific quality that is its own form of painful, and that the defensive architecture is doing its characteristic job of managing to a tolerable level. They know what happened, not in the fully conscious, clearly articulated form of self-awareness that genuine psychological work produces. In the felt, below conscious, below the surface presentation way of someone whose interior is doing an accounting that the exterior is not fully expressing, the extraordinary early period was real for them too. Was the specific, brief, genuinely free experience of being fully themselves in genuine connection with another person. Was the window in which the genuine interior, the full, undefended, extraordinarily capable version, was available and expressed and received. And now the fear is running and the architecture is back in place, and the genuine version is being managed back below the surface, and they are living with the specific, private, often unnamed knowledge that the person they are in relationship with is relating to the managed version rather than the genuine one. That the extraordinary thing that passed between two people in the early period is now partially inaccessible. Not gone, it is still there, still real, still occasionally present in the unguarded moments when the fear is briefly offline, but not available consistently. Not the daily reality. This is the avoidance version of the haunting. The specific, private, not fully acknowledged knowledge that the full version of themselves and the full version of the connection exist and are being held at a managed distance by the fear that the architecture was built to serve. That the person across from them is loving the managed version, while the genuine version is somewhere behind the walls. That the extraordinary thing is present and inaccessible, and the inaccessibility is of their own construction. This is genuinely painful. It is the specific, private, rarely named cost of dismissive avoidant attachment on the person who has it. Not just the damage to the people they love, the ongoing daily separation from the most genuine version of themselves and from the quality of connection that the genuine version makes possible. The living with the knowledge that the full version was available and is now managed, that the lovebombing phase was not just a gift to you, it was a brief liberation for them, and the fear that ended it took something from both of you simultaneously. The full picture of avoidant lovebombing contains all of this, the extraordinary genuine quality of the early experience. The neurological encoding that makes the comparison to the managed period so specifically brutal, the trap of the capacity being real, while the consistent availability of the capacity is not. The haunting quality of the aftermath, the separation of experience from source as the specific work that recovery requires, the avoidant's own private version of the loss. All of it together. None of it makes the brutality less brutal. The naming of the full picture does not soften the specific, serious, genuinely difficult impact of the experience. What it does is give the impact an accurate address, allows the grief to be organized around what is actually true, rather than around the simplified version that is either all loss or all hope. What is true is that you received something real and extraordinary. What is true is that the consistent availability of that real and extraordinary thing is not currently accessible in the form required for a relationship that builds on it daily. What is true is that the capacity exists in the specific person and the consistent availability does not currently exist in the specific person, and both things are simultaneously real. What is also true is that the quality of the experience, the full version, the genuine seeing, the undefended presence, the specific extraordinary quality of being known and met in the way the love bombing phase delivered, is possible in the world, is not unique to this person as its only available source, is available in people whose architecture does not include the fear that makes the consistent availability impossible. People for whom the full version is the ordinary daily version rather than the fear-free exception. You know what it feels like. You have the reference point at full resolution rather than in the abstract. You know the specific quality of what you are looking for with the embodied precision of someone who has felt it, rather than the conceptual approximation of someone who has only imagined it. That is not nothing. That is the specific, hard-won, costs something real knowledge of someone who received the real thing and now carries the accurate reference point for what the real thing actually is. Take it forward, into the life that uses it as the compass rather than as the wound. Into the genuine, available, building toward it possibility of someone who can give you the full version, not just when the fear is offline, but every day, ordinary days included. That is what you deserve. And you know it now with a precision and a certainty that only the direct experience could have produced. Use it.